Greetings and welcome to Chapter 4. We finished the organizational environment and culture. That was Chapter 3 last time. And this chapter is important because what it does, it wraps up Part 1 of the textbook for us. And so Part 1 is Intro to Management, and this is the last chapter in Part 1. After this chapter, we'll start Part 2, which is Planning, a very important chapter. And we'll start with planning and decision making for Chapter 5. So that's how this chapter fits in. Let's look at our table of content and learning outcomes and see what we'll be looking at today. So we'll identify common types of deviance in the workplace. Look at the U.S. Sentencing Commission guidelines for companies and explain how they encourage ethical behavior and punish it. And also how it's not entirely perfect, by the way. Describe what influences ethical decision making. What are the practical steps managers can take to improve ethical decision making? We'll also look at to whom organizations are socially responsible, for what they're socially responsible, how they can respond to societal demands for social responsibility. We'll look at whether social responsibility hurts or helps an organization's economic performance. And so that's for that. The first thing I want to talk about is looking at the introduction of your author on page 69. And as you look at page 69, you'll see a lot of different statistics from various surveys I wanted to share with you. And really, it's a good way to start this chapter because it just gives us perspective. Based on the various surveys that are found in the chapter, 65% of employees trust the company where they work. That's more than half, but it's definitely not a resounding victory in terms of employees trusting where they work. Only 40% believe the companies they work for are ethical. 37% believe that CEOs can be believed. 24% of unethical behavior is committed by senior managers. 60% is committed by managers of all kinds. And when asked which quality is more important in senior leaders, respondents, the most popular answer, the one that was statistically the one that ranked the highest was honesty, with 30%, and communications with 20%. So again, some sobering statistics in terms of ethics in the workplace and perception thereof. All right, so moving along, let's look at the basic definitions of ethics. And by the way, please follow along with your book. I hope you've already read the chapter before you look at the slides. It's the best way to do it, to familiarize yourself with it, and then what I try to do with the slides is go over the material with you and try to give you some additional applications. So first, ethics itself, set of moral principles or values that define right and wrong for a person or group. That's pretty straightforward. The ethical behavior follows accepted principles of right, wrong, etc. So that's when you look at different types of ethical behavior: sabotage, vandalism, faking injuries, people who call in sick, workman's comp. I mean, also there's a line, of course, where ethical behavior kind of goes beyond ethics and into just criminal behavior, right? Let's see. So now what we do is we look at these types of workplace deviance, right? Workplace deviance, here's what they are. Unethical behavior that violates organizational norms about right and wrong. 89% of employees admit to wasting time at work. This is called cyber loafing, right? Just all the time that people are spending on their phones. It's estimated to cost $85 billion a year in productivity. And, it's interesting because now with the pandemic, everybody working from home, the figures are going to come out differently in terms of productivity from home, but still with a pretty heavy dose of cyber loafing. Many of us are working more from home. Many of us are working on the weekend, in a way that maybe we didn't used to work on before, as we're trying to get our Canvas courses going, or YouTube lectures posted and Zoom meetings, etc. Definitely more time spent on that than face-to-face classes. So now let's look at the types of workplace deviance. What you have 4 areas, right? The top left, production deviance; top right, property deviance; and then we're going political, top bottom left, and then personal aggression, bottom right. So these are the 4. Obviously, you can see that some are interpersonal at the bottom, and at the top you have the organizational, and then the minors on the left, the serious on the right. Obviously, so this is when you look at the minor interpersonal, favoritism, gossiping, blaming, co-working, the stuff. And by the way, it's minor and it starts interpersonal, but it can backfire. Saying something about a colleague that is inflammatory or could even lead to defamation could really end costing you a lot in terms of your job and even financially if this thing results in a lawsuit. Again, for the minor organizational, leaving early, taking excessive breaks, intentionally working slowly, wasting resources. Those are, again, depending on the company, by the way, they can be even maybe more serious. And then moving to the right over here, let's start with the organizational serious property deviance. So sabotaging equipment, accepting kickbacks, bribes, things like that, lying about hours worked, and stealing from company. I heard a story about an individual at Ch4 College who was claiming to be working, and while he was claiming to be working instead, he was taking classes at a university while he was claiming to be working at Ch4 College. And so, of course, they found out, and he was fired. But that can be really bad. It could cost you more than just losing your job, by the way. And then for the personal aggression, of course, sexual harassment, verbal abuse, things that lead to what's called a hostile work environment. We'll talk about that more when we cover human resources, stealing, endangering coworkers. So all of these things, maybe think about where you work and think how many of these things you can identify and kind of think about. And again, throughout the class, we'll learn a lot more about this. And so now let's move on to the U.S. Sentencing Commission guideline for organizations. I decided here to kind of incorporate some current events. So first, it covers offenses defined by federal laws, right? And it encourages companies to take proactive steps that will discourage white-collar crime. It gives companies an incentive to cooperate and disclose illegal activities to federal authority. What you should know is that it is illegal to participate in bribery overseas, right? So that's one of the big things that happens here. There's a computation to determine the punishment, and you look at the base fine and determine the level of offense. The level of offense varies depending on the kind of crime, what losses incurred, and the amount of planning that went into the crime. You then look at the judicial determination of a culpability score. And in your book on page 73, you'll see a table for calculating the culpability score, base fine, and offense level. There's no real formula that I can provide you. Some people claim it's pretty arbitrary in terms of the government deciding where to go, but I'm sure they have their own formula. And then you determine a total fine. Again, if you have your book, I hope you're looking at page 73, and you'll see a big table that shows you, how that's calculated. You multiply the base fine by the culpability score, and that's how you get the amount. The highest on column 4 and step 38 or more at the very bottom, the highest fine that a company can pay is $600 million, which Siemens, the German multinational, I believe, I think has the record for the highest the amount of money paid. And so moving on to the compliance programs here, what you have again on the left here, the revised compliance program, how that works. What I did here is I included a clip from PBS NewsHour I'm going to show you the whole clip. I'll show you a part, but this is about Walmart and allegations of Walmart with major bribery scandal. In fact, quite international. I'll show you that clip right now.
And we turn to the still unfolding story of Walmart and allegations of bribery in Mexico. Judy Woodruff has more.
With more than 2,000 stores throughout the country, Mexico is an important foreign market for Walmart. But a New York Times investigation has raised troubling questions over Walmart's dominance there and how it came to be. Among some of the findings, former executives for the company orchestrated a campaign of bribery to obtain construction permits and build stores more quickly during the past decade. A paper trail of bribery documenting payments of more than $24 million. And top executives of the company seemed to shut down an internal investigation until recently. Walmart is now conducting an inquiry into whether employees may have violated the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. That's a federal law that makes it a crime for American companies to bribe foreign officials. Bloomberg News also reports the company is the subject of a criminal probe by the U.S. Justice Department. We look more closely at the law and potential violations with Joseph Hoffman. He's a professor of law at the Indiana University Maurer School of Law. And we thank you for being with us.
Thanks for the invitation.
First of all, Professor Hoffman, tell us more of what is in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. What does it say?
So the FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, was enacted in 1977 in the wake of a number of corporate bribery scandals, including the Lockheed scandal. And the act has two major provisions, one of which prohibits a variety of corporations and individuals within U.S. jurisdiction from paying bribes to foreign government officials. And the other provision, major provision, requires issuers of U.S. stock issued through the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission procedures, requires those corporations to maintain transparent accounting records so that bribes can be identified.
All right. Let's leave it at that. You're absolutely welcome to watch the entire program. It's about almost 8 minutes. I want to kind of give you an update. So this happened a while back, right? And more recently, Walmart's international corruption scandals continue. So this happened with, the $282 million amount to settle this 7-year global corruption probe, right? And it wasn't just Mexico's. Mexico, Brazil, China, and India, where Walmart violated the U.S. Foreign Corruption Practices Act. I kind of wanted to give you a little perspective here. That's a $282 million fine. The maximum fine is $600 million. So this was a settlement, right? This was the latest annual report. There's the link. And just in their annual report, fiscal 2020, total revenue for Walmart was $524 billion. So you can see that $282 million really a drop in the bucket there. I want to do that to give you perspective, and that's why when I started this and I wanted to talk to you about the U.S. Sentencing Commission guidelines, some critics say that it is not an effective tool with multinationals that can just maybe pay a fine as just a cost of doing business after they've taken over the market share of the country they've penetrated. Just some food for thought. So let's see, influence on decision making. So you have to look at the ethical intensity of the decision, the moral development of the people making decision, and the principles of the ethical decision making. So all of these are the three main components for what influences ethical decision making. In terms of, let's start with the first one, the ethical intensity. So I'm using the example from your author here the Save Josh campaign with this young man here who needed a drug, and the drug was prohibitive. It was Chimerix, the company that had it. This is all on page 74, 75. And, it was maybe hopefully going to save his life. Unfortunately, he did perish even after the company did give the dosage to the child. But the ethical intensity in this particular case was the campaign. Here's a screenshot of the campaign that had begun for people to try to put pressure on the pharmaceutical company to go ahead and give out the drug so that he could use it. Managerial decision making differ in their ethical intensity. So let's look at the factors that contribute to ethical intensity. First, there's the magnitude of consequence, right? The total harm or benefit derived from an ethical decision. The more people who are harmed, or the greater the harm to those people, the larger the consequence. So that's what that is. And then we're getting into social consensus. By the way, this is page 75. And so this is where you're looking at the agreement as to whether the behavior is bad or good. And then lastly, the probability of effect. What's the chance that something will happen and that the result will harm others, right? And so you're looking at these three factors here. There's more, the temporal immediacy, the time between an act and the consequence of the act. So if a manager has to lay off workers next week as opposed to 3 months from now, basically the temporal immediacy. Then we're getting into the proximity of effect, the social, psychological, cultural, and physical distance between the decision maker and those affected by their decision. And then lastly, the concentration of effect. What's the total harm that the act produce on the average person? I wanna let you know that the reason I'm kind of with this chapter, I'm giving you hopefully a broad perspective in terms of depth. I'm not going to dig in. The reason is that business ethics is a requirement for most of you. For those of you who are doing the Business Administration General Admission degree on the right here, you will be required to take business ethics, and you're in luck. My colleague, Dr. Carol Dickerson, is an expert at this, and she's amazing. So her profession is accounting, public accounting, but she actually wrote her entire doctoral dissertation on ethical decision making within public accounting. And the two areas of focus was the social consensus and proximity, which is why I have this slide here. So again, I know this class is a requirement for most of you. If it is not a requirement for you, I still strongly encourage you to take it. You'll have the description at the bottom right of the screen here. Take it with Dr. Carol Dickerson, and you will get a lot out of the class. And it's, by the way, one of those classes when people ask, why should I hire you? And how are you different from others as a business major? Believe it or not, a lot of bachelor's degrees still do not require business ethics. It is not a requirement for many Cal States and UCs. All right, let's move on. Let's see here. The Kohlberg stage of moral development. So what he did here, Kohlberg, is come up with it's three key areas, and each area has two within. And so, by the way, a lot of detail here from 76 on about that. So basically, you have these within these stages, right? This is all based on your own level of moral development, right? So he's got these, if you want, call them phases of moral development with each stage per phase. So the first one with the pre-conventional, this is known as the self-interest. If you want, just call this whole blue area selfish. And so the stage one with the pre-conventional is what someone will do in terms of compliance only because they're afraid of getting caught. It's because of punishment and obedience. And so this is again, someone who's just going to only do it because they don't want to get caught. Within the pre-conventional, the second one is They just do it because it's going to advance their needs. That's the instrumental. By the way, I modified this slide from the author. I just thought it'd be easier to do it this way. Stage 3, the good boy, nice girl, conventional, it's okay because as long as everybody's doing it, I can do it too. I always think about getting pulled over for speeding on the freeway and everybody's got the same answer. Everybody's speeding. And so, that's for that stage. And then stage 4, it's okay as long as it's legal. That's the law and order conventional. So these are under conforming to societal expectation. That's what's going on here. And the last phase here is internalized principles, right? And this is when the author will tell you that this is where most people, like this is what when you get to be a mature human being, you'll maybe be here. He talks about education. People who have a higher education will be maybe more likely to be over here. And so society is better when rights of others are not violated. That's stage 5, the social contract. Stage 6 is the universal principle. And this thing is kind of interesting because it may or may not depend on one's principle, how they're going to behave. All right, so that's for Kohlberg. Now let's go to another gentleman, and he's the one who came up with the principles of ethical decision making here, LaRue Hosmer. He was a Harvard professor, 3 degrees from Harvard, and his emphasis was interdisciplinary ethics. Again, just know the basic definitions on this. What I will just tell you is that he, in each area, he basically dabbled, if you want, in each of these areas for the interdisciplinary ethics. So first, for the long-term ethics, here basically he's saying you should never take any action that is not in your organization's long-term self-interest. So that's the first one. By the way, page 77. Religious injunction. Here he says you should never take any action that is unkind or that harms a sense of community, such as positive feeling that comes from working together. And then we're getting into the government regulations. The laws represent the minimal moral standard. You've heard this before, maybe, the moral minimum. So that's government regulation. Don't take any action that violates the law. That's it. You can probably juxtapose some of these with the previous slide, right? And then the individual rights. And so that holds that you should never take an action that infringes on others' agreed upon rights. Personal virtue, I have these 2 little icons to kind of help you out. And so for this particular one, it holds that you should never do anything that is not honest, open, and truthful, and that you would not be glad to see reported on the newspaper or TV. So that's, it's also known as a newspaper test or the TV test. You're about to do this questionable thing you're about to do maybe, and then the question is, are you going to be proud of this if it ends up, for front page news tomorrow? Distributive justice, you should never take any action that harms the least fortunate among us in some way. And then lastly, the utilitarian benefit. You've heard of this before. People call it sometimes the greater good. You should never take any action that does not result in greater good for society. Flu shots, right? So flu shots save lives. That's it. Thousands of people their lives literally are saved because they get the flu shot every year. Some people will die as a direct cause of a deadly reaction to the same flu shot. So then this is where it becomes a numbers game, right? And you look at how many lives were saved by the flu shot versus how many lives lost because of a deadly reaction to the flu shot. And of course, the numbers are in the, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands to less than 100. And you can, by the way, this is information you can get from the government. There's a compensation there for families that have lost loved ones to that. So that's the utilitarian approach. There's tons of examples I could give you, but for now, that's the one that seems to be the most common. And then we're getting into the practical steps of decision making. So this is where you select and hire ethical employees by using overt integrity tests. An example of that from your author is, for example, asking potential applicant, would you ever consider buying something from someone if you knew the person had stolen the item? Or you just rhetorically ask, don't most people steal from their companies anyway? And so that's one example. The other is a personality-based integrity test where, it's a little bit more organized. They were talking about, the author talks about prison inmates serving time for white-collar crime like counterfeiting, embezzlement, etc., scored much lower than a comparison group of middle-level managers on scales measuring reliability, dependability, etc. Well, so I guess they're in the best place they could be. And then, establishing a specific code of ethics and developing standards and procedures specific to the company. Here, what I did is I pasted the Ch4 College Code of Ethics here as one, the administrative procedure from Ch4, and this is the latest one from January of this year, just to kind of give you an idea as an example. Now let's go on to the next slide, which is about training employees to make ethical decisions. And so here, we talk about developing employees' awareness of ethics, and there's several ways of doing that. You can, there's of course documentations. There's, as we said, the code of ethics. We just talked about that earlier. But how do you make sure that your employees are aware? One of the ways that you can do that is first you have to achieve credibility with them, so they have to respect you. And for that, go back to the very first slide that we talked about. The second thing is, the third thing, teaching a practical model of ethical decision making. So I'll show you a clip here that is featured in your book on page 80. This is a clip that was pioneered for CA Technologies, and they created this fictional manager whose name is Griffith Peabody. In this case, this is a very important little clip. I mean, it's meant to be a little bit goofy and funny, but probably one of the areas that's very, very contentious with companies is purchasing, right? So making a contract, purchasing, and not having any quid pro quo, not having, bribes, basically. And so here's a short clip.
Trade show special. Win a trip to Hawaii. Who wants to? Oh.
Hey, do you need a lay for that?
I got one, baby. You want one? Oh, second one today, right? Don't answer that. You. Yellow Brick.
Yeah.
Griffin Peabody. Great to meet you.
Well, nice to meet you. I'm Jeff.
Oh, man, listen, I know all about Yellow Brick.
One brick at a time.
One brick. I love that slogan.
We do a lot of business with that slogan.
Oh, man, what do you do there?
I'm the head of procurement there.
You buy stuff?
I oversee the purchasing.
Software?
Software is a big part of our business, yes.
Software?
Yes.
Oh, hey. I guarantee you're going to win this trip to Hawaii if you help me close this big deal I got brewing with Yellow Brick.
Shouldn't I do a demo?
No, you don't need to demo the software. You know why? Because all these people did. You don't need to do it.
Well, they're in line here for the raffle.
That is the bin of losers. This is the palm of the winner.
Oh, I tell you, I'm not a palm reader, but it seems like the place I'd like to have that card.
You come back in an hour. I guarantee you're going to be pleased.
I will be there.
And so, again, it's meant to be cheesy, but that's it right there. Let's see. Moving along to the steps for establishing an ethical climate. So you need to ensure that managers act ethically themselves. That's a big problem, right? If the managers don't act ethically, then of course, why bother? Ensuring top management is active and committed to the company's ethics program. So when again, going back to what we just saw with the CA Technologies, you can see that in this particular case, the management is active. I mean, they have created these videos, and they want to make sure that the employees understand. Developing a reporting systems that encourages whistleblowers. So that's a big topic. And there are laws, by the way, for the laws that protect whistleblowers, so that companies don't retaliate against employees who blow the whistle on their practices. Fairly and consistently punish those who violate the code of ethics is another one. So the perspective regarding social responsibility organizations, the first one is the shareholder model. Companies' overriding goals should be profit maximization for the benefit of the shareholders. So this is an old one. I mean, this is in fact, what's great is about this. Millennials actually are the ones that have really influenced companies to kind of revisit some of the companies that only follow the shareholder model because they've realized that they have to go above and beyond with social responsibility and ethics. The stakeholder model is the one that resonates more today. Management's important responsibility is a firm's long-term survival, which can be achieved by satisfying the interest of multiple corporate stakeholders. And so what you have here is, the model of social responsibility with stakeholder. So you could see that you have primary and secondary stakeholder just around the firm, right? So your primary governments, local communities, shareholders, employees, customers, suppliers. And then your secondary are going to be the interest groups, trade association, media, etc. So you have that responsibility to them when you follow that model. The social responsibility of company to stakeholder is first, economic responsibility. Make a profit by producing a valued product or service. If you're not profitable, nothing else is really going to stand, right? Second is the legal responsibility to obey the laws and regulations. And then, of course, the ethics responsibility, abide by accepted principles of right and wrong when conducting business. And discretionary, the social role that a company fulfills beyond its economic, legal, and ethical responsibilities. So there are different strategies for companies in terms of how they're going to behave, how they're going to respond, right? The reactive is where the company does less than society expects. The defensive, they admit responsibility for a problem, but they do the least required to meet societal expectation. Accommodating is when they accept responsibility for a problem and does all that society expects to solve the problem. But where you want to be, of course, is proactive. The company anticipates a problem before it occurs and does more than society expects. So I mean, there's so many examples I can give you. One of the famous ones is BMW and how BMW was one of the first German companies out there to proactively start even purchasing recycling plants and starting to engineer the material they use in their cars so that it wouldn't just be hazardous or wasteful, and that it could eventually be recycled in a more streamlined way. That's proactive. And so looking at social responsibility and economic performance, there's no trade-off between being socially responsible and and economic performance. And the relationship becomes stronger when a company has a strong reputation for social responsibility. There's no guarantee that socially responsible companies, however, will be profitable. And that concludes that. As always, please be mindful of your key terms. Make sure that you get them out of the way. Get your flashcards. We've covered them all so far in this in these slides. And then beyond that, make sure that you have also your application and your understanding of the material so that you are ready for the quiz. Summary, same thing. I would recommend that you look at these bullets and you make sure that you have understood. And that concludes this chapter. We'll see you for the next chapter.